The Red Scare of the 1950s caused millions of Americans to lose their jobs. They were outed as communists, even if they weren't. At the same time, around the late 1940s or early 1960s, there was another scare going on. It was called the Lavender Scare. To understand our history is to know not to repeat it. We've made mistakes in our past, and it is our responsibility as people to know that history so that we can avoid the mistakes that we may have made in the past and hopefully build on it for a better future. The Lavender Scare was a critical part of American history that we need to talk about and understand, hopefully to not repeat anything like it again. The rising fear of homosexual people, their connections to communism, and the end of the Lavender Scare are all going to be reviewed, and I will start with the rising fear. To begin, the fear of homosexual people caused fright within Americans. Americans saw LGBT people as less than. They weren't as good or they were kind of grosser than the normal American. In the History.com article, How LGBT Civil Servants Became Public Enemy Number One, the LGBT community was said to have grown in cities. In small towns, you might have seen a few gay or lesbian people, but you never would have known it, and even if you were one yourself, you would never find them. But with clubs and bars and things like that in bigger cities, you can find those people and you can have a community. People were aware that homosexual people existed, and they knew that they had started building a community in cities. It was a concern for some people, but there was not much that people really did about it. They just saw them as gross perverts. They were seen as mentally ill. Behind me, I have a presentation showing a executive order by Dwight D. Eisenhower. In this, he states reason that government officials can be fired. And number 3 on this list, any criminal, infamous, dishonest, immoral, or notoriously disgraceful conduct, habitual use of intoxicants to excess, drug addiction, or sexual perversion. Sexual perversion in this time was also a reference to homosexuality. Now that we understand the history of before the Lavender Scare and leading up to it, we can address how it was connected to communism. I have a quote from the National Archives, an article called "These People Are Frightened to Death." It is from an expose that was written during the 1960s, 1950s. Members of one conspiracy are prone to join another conspiracy. This is why so many homosexuals, from being enemies of society in general, become enemies of capitalism in particular. This is saying that homosexual people, part of a conspiracy, would easily join communism, as homosexual people hate society, and capitalism is just an aspect of that. Communism and homosexual people were also connected through stereotypes. People believed that to be communist you had to be mentally or physically deficient or ill, and homosexuality was seen as one of those illnesses that people could have that could lead to communism. McCarthy was a big person during this time, especially because of the Red Scare. He claimed he had a list of 207 people within the government, high officials, that were communist, or allegedly communist. A good majority of these people, he claimed, were homosexual. As a final point, the Lavender Scare started to die down around the early 1960s. Although people of homosexual people were not fired any longer from their jobs, or at least not as much, they were still scared to get government jobs. They didn't want those jobs because they knew that they could be outed. This was slightly over exaggerated because, as far as most people know, no government officials were outed by the government. They wanted to keep it silent so as the American people didn't realize how many homosexual people were in government. But specific cases, such as some people, I have a list over here, were very specific, and people could kind of figure out if you knew this person by what happened. On this list, there are 2 white males of ages 32 and 18 who were caught in the Navy having sex, and it caused them both to be fired and separated. And if you knew this person, then it's likely you could have figured out it was him if you seen an article about this. It took until 1995 when Bill Clinton finally banned discrimination from hiring people within the government based on sexual orientation. To conclude, the Lavender Scare was a critical part of American history that needs to be remembered. To review the main points, the rising fear of homosexual people, their connection to communism, and the end of the Lavender Scare were all critical points throughout the entire ordeal. And as a final thought, please remember that there are a lot of people who experienced this. And we don't have that many stories. Because people weren't outed, they weren't forced to share what happened. And the majority of them didn't. Even to this day, we still don't have that many stories from the other end. And all these people are growing old. They might be dying. And we have to do what we can to remember what may have happened to them. We need to do what we can so nothing else can happen like this again. Thank you.